Donc, aujourd'hui, le comité entreprend.
So today, the committee is holding an information session, a briefing session with senior officials from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada and the Canada Water Agency for 1 hour. The witnesses are here with Mr. Adam Borden, Parliamentary Affairs at the Department, to support the testimony of these senior officials. Is it the will of the committee to have him attend the meeting?
On est d'accord?
Everyone's in agreement?
Les témoins aujourd'hui sont
the witnesses from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, Patricia Brady, Vice President, Strategic Policy and Programs, Ian Ketchison, Vice President, Indigenous Relations, Éric Landry, Vice President, Operations. From the Canada Water Agency, Gemma Bogue, Director General, Freshwater Policy and Engagement, Véronique Hilliard-Baird, Director General, Freshwater Management, Justina Frobisher, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Acting Director General, Corporate Services Directorate, and she's by video conference. Is that correct? Is that all right, Mr. Clerk? Yes.
Each organization has up to 5 minutes to make an opening statement, and we will start with the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Honourable members, my name is Tricia Brady, and I'm the Vice President of the Strategic Policy and Programs sector at the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. I'm here with my colleagues, Ian Ketchison, who's the Vice President of Indigenous Relations, and Éric Landry, who is the Vice President of Operations at the agency. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Je suis heureuse de comparaître devant le comité.
I'm pleased to appear before the committee today to provide an overview of the work of the Impact Assessment Agency and to answer your questions on the Impact Assessment Act. The agency's main responsibility is to conduct impact assessments of major projects and regional assessments which look at prospective development on a regional basis to identify issues in advance, including cumulative effects. Impact assessment is a project planning tool, and the Act provides for a process and forum to assess the effects of projects, coordinate Crown consultation, and meet the duty to consult, as well as to obtain public input. on major projects. Assessments ensure that issues are identified in advance so that adverse effects in federal areas that may be caused by projects can be prevented or mitigated through project design changes or conditions.
Projects like large mines, nuclear facilities, and ports. Projects subject to the Act are identified in the Physical Activities Regulations, which is commonly known as the project list, and it sets out the types and sizes of projects that are subject to the Act. The list focuses on those projects that are most likely to cause adverse effects in areas of federal jurisdiction, which include effects on fish and fish habitat, migratory birds, transboundary waters, and impacts on Indigenous peoples. Since the Impact Assessment Act first came into force in 2019, an average of 8 projects per year have met these thresholds and entered the federal assessment process. These projects are subject to an initial assessment, which includes consultations with Indigenous peoples and the public, identification of key issues, and then a determination by the agency as to whether a comprehensive assessment is required. Approximately 40% of the projects that have come in triggered the Act have completed the process at that stage with early decisions, and many of those have been within 6 months. Only the most complex projects with the potential for serious adverse effects in federal jurisdiction will require more comprehensive assessments. For these projects, the agency is now reforming our processes to be able to complete comprehensive assessments within 2 years and in line with the government's commitments. There is flexibility within the current framework to do this through a number of measures, including focusing on key issues within federal jurisdiction, consulting Indigenous peoples earlier and in a more targeted manner, standardizing process elements such as mitigation measures, using new tools, including artificial intelligence, to streamline internal process timelines, and reducing information requirements on proponents by relying on and deferring to provincial processes where there's overlap that exists. Cooperation with provinces will be key to meeting accelerated timelines and is a major focus for the agency right now. In the speech from the throne, the government committed to striking cooperation agreements with every interested province to realize the goal of one project, one review for major projects. First ministers then agreed to work toward efficiently and effectively implementing this with the goal of a single assessment for all projects in a manner that respects federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdiction, enhances coordination activities on permitting, and eliminates duplication. Cooperation agreements under the Impact Assessment Act will enable this and will set out how we'll work with provinces to meet shared and respective responsibilities to protect the environment and Indigenous rights. This would replicate the positive experience we've had with BC, where one project, one review has been the norm for the past decade. The agency's been working with provincial counterparts to develop agreements. We're currently consulting publicly on the one project, one review approach, and we have our first draft agreement, other than the agreement that exists with BC, but our first draft agreement out with New Brunswick was posted last week for consultation, and we are hopeful and expect more to come in the coming weeks. Je vous remercie encore une fois de m'avoir.
Thank you once again for the opportunity to highlight some of the agency's current work and priorities. My colleagues and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Grady. Now, 5 minutes for the Canada Water Agency.
Thank you, Chair, honourable members. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We honour their enduring relationship with this land and water, and we recognise the vital role of Indigenous peoples in protecting and stewarding fresh water. The Canada Water Agency is a new federal organization with the mandate to improve freshwater management in Canada by providing leadership, effective collaboration federally, and improved coordination and collaboration with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples to proactively address national and regional transboundary freshwater challenges and opportunities. The agency launched in October 2024 with the coming into force of the Canada Water Agency Act. The agency reports to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and is headquartered in Winnipeg with offices across the country to ensure responsiveness to regional freshwater issues. Fresh water is an irreplaceable natural resource. From coast to coast to coast, fresh water is fundamental to the economy, communities, and the environment. Pressures such as climate change, land use change, and pollution are driving changes in freshwater quality and quantity. Freshwater governance in Canada is complex, highlighting the need for strong, ongoing collaboration. L'Agence de l'eau du Canada.
The Canada Water Agency directly responds to Canada's freshwater challenges and opportunities through work in 5 key areas. First, through service to Canadians. We are focused on restoring and protecting significant freshwater ecosystems. For example, one of our key programs is the delivery of freshwater ecosystems initiatives in the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence River, Lake Winnipeg, and other nationally significant water bodies across the country. The Water Agency supports freshwater management programs that improve ecosystem health in service to Canadians. These initiatives also mobilize financial commitments from multiple partners. The geographic extent of these initiatives is enormous, including approximately 90% of Canada's population and covering 40% of Canada's surface area. Second, the agency provides policy leadership that responds to Canada's most pressing freshwater challenges and opportunities. For instance, the Canada Water Agency chairs the Federal Freshwater Committee. It provides a forum for strategic discussion among senior management from 26 federal departments and agencies with a responsibility toward freshwater.
Cross-country collaboration, which involves creating partnerships to protect nationally significant freshwater ecosystems. In this role, the agency chairs and supports several domestic and international water boards, which strengthen collaboration on water issues between jurisdictions. In our fourth work stream, we work to promote freshwater literacy to cultivate a water-aware Canada. As part of our freshwater ecosystem initiatives, we collaborate with partners to deliver reports on the state of significant water bodies. Through the Eco Action Program, we support community-led projects aimed at increasing community engagement in protecting and sustaining freshwater resources. And lastly, our work on science and data is focused on translating freshwater science and data to inform decision-making. For example, the agency is collaboratively leading the development of a national freshwater data strategy to establish guidelines and principles for how freshwater information can be stored, organized, and shared. En conclusion, l'Agence de l'eau du Canada.
In closing, the Canada Water Agency is committed to ensuring that fresh water in Canada is clean, safe, and well managed today and for generations to come. We look forward to working on the government's freshwater priorities. Thank you, and we'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Merci.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madame Bogue, for your comments. Now, we will start with the Conservative side. Mr. Ross, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Very enlightening. I'm glad to hear that we're talking about indigenous issues as well as transboundary issues. First Nations from USA are currently intending to expand their interest under Section 35 of the Constitution to be arguing that they are owed a duty to consult and accommodate with major projects and minor projects in Canada. How are your departments preparing for this challenge?
So I can respond. So we are, as you're aware, and as the committee will be aware, there was a recent Supreme Court case which had indicated. Oh, I have to do it. Sorry about that. I thought it was going to happen automatically.
And by the way, I should have prefaced that with the court case to solve.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. So following the Desautels decision, which did find that there's a possibility for some Indigenous nations in the United States to have some Section 35 rights in Canada, we're very aware of that. In the current context, there have been a number of projects coming through the Impact Assessment Agency system, which have have been located in close proximity to the United States. We work closely with our colleagues in British Columbia on these. We have not been formally consulting with those groups in our projects. However, BC has a process for working with the Southeast Alaska Indigenous groups, and we have provided some engagement support for them currently, but we recognize that following the Deshotel case, it is important to hear perspectives from communities based outside of Canada. But on the active projects we have not identified them for consultation, but we've been working to ensure that their concerns are heard.
Thank you. But you are aware that that court case was actually very narrowly defined. It didn't expand into Section 35 rights per se. It was a hunting right, and if anybody else wants to challenge that, it's got to be challenged in our courts, but not necessarily mean that we need to consult and accommodate First Nations from the United States. I was very glad to hear about the efficient timelines proposed and the objectives for the new impact assessment guidelines. And we talked about duplication. I heard about that. It sounds very similar to the newly created Major Projects Office. Is there going to be a lot of duplication? Because it sounds exactly the same as what was described by the Prime Minister in terms of fast-tracking major projects.
I can answer that. So I would say that not all of the projects that will be eventually listed under the new Building Canada Act will necessarily be projects that are designated under the Impact Assessment Act. So there's a potential that there would be projects listed that actually are not subject to the Impact Assessment Act. Where projects that are designated under the Building Canada Act are subject to impact assessment, proponents for those projects will continue to be required to provide information and go through our process, and we will continue to be required to do an impact assessment. And the difference is, at the end of that, conditions will be recommended as a result of our process to the minister responsible for the Building Canada Act. And then those conditions will be part of a single authorization or conditions document that would be issued for the project, which would accompany conditions related to, which would have otherwise been in perhaps a separate Fisheries Act authorization or any other permits that might be required. And so impact assessment, if it would otherwise apply to a project that is designated under that act, will continue to apply, but it will be a streamlined process and a streamlined conditions document. We will continue to have a role in conducting impact assessments.
Thank you. So national security is a big issue, and I haven't heard any conversation about that in relation to environmental assessments. But is there any process in terms of potential participants in environmental assessments? Are there any background checks to see if their participation in a Canadian impact assessment is fully or partially funded or even influenced by foreign interest groups?
So national security isn't a factor under the Impact Assessment Act, looking at impacts of projects, but the Investment Canada Act's National Security Act provisions would apply to investments in major projects, and so there is a federal act that looks at national security issues for investments and who the investors are in major projects. It's obviously a separate act, but when we're talking about impact assessment, we're focused on the impacts of the project and not the investor.
Not anybody asking to participate in an environmental assessment. There's no background check to see if these participants are funded by foreign interests or influenced by foreign interests when they're actually trying to engage in environmental assessment that will affect Canada's future.
I have some mic problems. It is a public process, and so members of the public, interest groups, Indigenous groups, obviously, our community members are invited to provide input public input into the public process. All of that is factored into consideration.
My question is there any background checks to participants to see if they're actually being influenced or funded by foreign interest groups?
We don't do background checks. We often get thousands of comments on the public record submitted through our website with respect to projects, so we don't do background checks in that regard. We do vet comments, of course, for appropriateness before they are posted online.
Okay. And does the current Canadian Environmental Assessment allow for non-federal or non-provincial governmental environmental assessments to be legally recognized, similar to BC's Environmental Assessment Act?
Time is up. A very, very short response, please.
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we will go to Mr. Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. I apologize. And you mentioned the collaboration or cooperation agreement that was signed with New Brunswick, and I was lucky enough to meet with a delegation from New Brunswick 2 days ago, and share it that I recognize that they did sign that. As a member from British Columbia, I do know that it brings certainty to businesses in my province, and I just wanted to ask if you could expand on how IAC works with and collaborates with provinces on impact assessments and collaboration.
So I'll take this one. So we have a memorandum of understanding with the province of British Columbia. It sets the framework in terms and defines how we collaborate with the province. So the agreement sets a framework for substitution. So essentially how substitution works, the provincial minister will make a request for the project to be substituted to the provincial process. So essentially the provincial process will meet the needs of both the federal government as well as the provincial governments. So it is a single process to meet the needs of both governments. So essentially, my team in the region will work closely with the BC Environmental Agency Office, and we will support them through that process. We will support Indigenous consultation through that process. We also offer participant funding for that process. So essentially, the province manages that process, and we're there to support them. So it leads to an efficient process. So it's one process, one review. And once the province has completed its review, it will submit a report to provincial ministers. Typically, there's 2 ministers in BC that will make the decision, and to the federal minister of the environment for their decisions. And there's a good track record of substitution. The vast majority of our projects are substituted to the province. And by way of 2, I guess, recent example under the Impact Assessment Act, the Cedar LNG project was approved in about 3.5 years. And more recently, the Xylism LNG project was approved on September 15th, and that was roughly close to 4 years, just over 4 years.
Thank you. And you mentioned consultation with Indigenous groups as well, and I just wanted to expand on that. How does IAC engage and consult with Indigenous communities as part of the impact assessment process?
Great, thanks for the question. So we, our overwhelming priority in conducting an impact assessment on the Indigenous consultation side is that we are ensuring the full active participation of Indigenous groups that are potentially affected, that they have a leadership role in the assessment itself. And that means that we have dedicated teams across the country that will work closely with the communities to make sure that we're working with them in a way that works for their governance and the way that they make decisions and build consensus within communities. And at every step of the way, we ensure that we're working hand in hand with our Indigenous partners to make sure that we can truly understand and communicate to decision makers the range of potential impacts and ensure that those messages and concerns are carried all the way through. We work with around a bit more than 300 communities across the country, and we have teams across the country that spend a lot of time working with those partners to make sure that that their voices are heard and prioritized in the process.
Great, thanks. And I don't want to leave out our water folks over here. I want to make sure that I ask a couple of questions. I live on the mouth of the Fraser River, where the fresh water meets the salt water of the Pacific Ocean, and fresh water is important for the salmon that run by. I just wanted to ask how is the agency coordinating at all levels of government, territories and Indigenous communities to engage in shared water management?
Thank you for the question. And so we are focused on collaborating at the federal level. So within the federal government, there are over 20 departments and agencies that touch on fresh water in some way. So the agency chairs, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, an interdepartmental committee to bring together those departments to advance strategic approaches to working on freshwater issues. We also work closely with provinces and territories in terms of implementing freshwater ecosystem initiatives. We also work jointly with those governments on water boards. So, for example, the Prairie Provinces Water Board, the Mackenzie River Basin Board. And then we work closely with Indigenous partners, again, in those venues there, also on various initiatives that the agency is undertaking. So, for example, the development of a freshwater data strategy. We do engagement with Indigenous partners directly on that. And then, importantly, we also work with stakeholders and the public on initiatives. And so a current example of that is we're holding roundtables on water issues around the country. So whether that be water in the economy, water and collaboration in different jurisdictions, where we bring together experts and stakeholders to discuss issues. So that's a bit of our convening role. So that's a bit of a high level. We can give more examples. Interested.
One short question with a short answer.
Okay.
Very short.
What investments are being made to address climate-driven challenges such as flooding and droughts?
So I would say, so in terms of flooding and droughts, so the majority of the agency's programs work on water quality issues, and some of those interventions, the programs that my colleague runs, help improve resilience to flood and drought impacts in watersheds. But there are other programs in the federal government that look at flood and drought issues as well. But just recognizing the time, I'll stop there.
Merci. Donc, je passe la parole.
Thank you very much. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Bonnet. 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentations. Thank you for being here. I'd like to know, when we talk about moving that program from 5 to 2 years, you gave different possibilities, but if it's that easy to do, why wasn't it done earlier in order to make it faster?
Je vais commencer par dire.
First, I'll say that there were deadlines in the legislation, and those are maximum deadlines. So when we started implementing the Act in 2019, we were following those instructions. But now we've got a different instruction. It's for 2 years. I'd like to clarify that there are a lot of misperceptions around the timeline.
So Eric mentioned that for assessments that have gone through the comprehensive process, he mentioned timelines there around 4 years. We have actually completed 20 assessments in and around 6 months, because the way the process works is there's an initial assessment period after which we may determine, after consultation, that there isn't a need for a comprehensive assessment. And so if you look at the average of the timelines of the full sort of an initial assessments and comprehensive assessments, it's more around 10 months. And so with that, I think the timelines are not as far off as we might think. But again, there's ways to improve our processes through experience, finding efficiencies. There are new tools available now that weren't when we began implementing the Act, and we're going to use those flexibilities to meet the 2-year timelines.
Merci. Tantôt, vous avez mentionné qu'un projet...
You mentioned that there is a bill, C5, and that you talked about if it's a designated project, there'd be an impact assessment. But my understanding is that the impact assessment is part of C5, so the government can decide to not have an impact assessment for a designated project. Am I understanding correctly?
If there is if a designated project under that Act is also a designated project under the Impact Assessment Act, which will not necessarily be the case, an impact assessment will be required of that project. So I think there was a mention of les 5 projets qui ont été...
I think somebody spoke to the 5 projects that were mentioned.
Projects were referred to the Major Projects Office. They haven't yet gone through the process to be formally listed or scheduled under the Building Canada Act. And so there's that. But of those projects, 3 of them have already completed assessments, and so they won't require any further assessment by us because those have already completed assessments, and 2 of the other projects are not subject to the Impact Assessment Act, and so they won't interact. We won't interact with them under the new act.
OK. Désolé, j'ai un petit problème avec le son parfois.
In the specific case of the airport in Montreal, the expansion of the airport, now, is there an environmental assessment that was done or that will be done? The environment minister told us that it wasn't possible to do it because of the section of the law, because an attribution was performed, and in this case, it's the Infrastructure Bank of Canada and its respective act. Can you explain, it's from what I understand, if the federal government puts money towards a project, automatically that project cannot be designated by the minister for an environmental assessment. The discretionary power of the minister to designate a project that is not on our list of projects, well, there are limits to this. What 9.7 specifies, there are 2 sub-elements. The first one is that another federal department issued a permit to allow the project to go forward, so the minister cannot use his or her discretionary authority. The second element is the case that applied for the Montreal airport. When a federal agency allocates funds, the minister cannot exercise his or her discretionary authority either. So when my team receives a designation request, the first thing we do is we check, is the project on the project list? If yes, then it's already designated, and there's no need to use this discretionary authority. The second thing, before we launch the formal process of asking for designation, is we check if there are restrictions, as laid out in 9.7, and in this case, the restriction did apply. If I recall correctly, I think for more than 75% of the cases of requests, about 15% of them had restrictions applied to them, and the minister could not exercise his or her discretionary authority. A very quick last question with a quick answer. The Canada Water Agency, thank you for being here. Recently, we saw that 87% of the PFASs on the river were coming from the Great Lakes. This is a pollutant. Do you have information on this? Because this is coming from Ontario, and it's a problem. If you don't have time to expand on this, could you please send us some information on this and let us know what's being done to deal with this problem? Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, but the time is up. Yes, we will provide an answer. Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Anstey.
Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Some of the information is helpful. I just want some clarity on a couple of things. The Prime Minister was recently in my province in Newfoundland and Labrador, and after he left, there was all kinds of news reports about the Bay du Nord project being on the major projects list. I'm just wondering, are they there? Are they listed?
There currently aren't any projects formally listed under the Building Canada Act. There was an announcement of the first 5 projects that were being referred to the new Major Projects Office. Bay du Nord is not one of those 5 projects. So there was an announcement of 5 projects that would be referred to the office. It will be for the office to determine whether or not those are designated or whether there are other services that those projects will benefit from. There were also 3 sort of broader strategies that are not at the project level phase, but were being referred to the office as well. So I can go through those. Those were in the public announcement. There's the Contrecoeur Port of Montreal expansion, Darlington Nuclear Project in Ontario, LNG Canada Phase 2, McIlvena Bay Mine in Saskatchewan, Red Chris Mine in BC, and then the sort of broader strategies that the office will consider, the Port of Churchill in Manitoba, Alto High-Speed Rail Project, and Wind West in the east.
Sorry, I probably should have clarified. I meant, are they being considered? Have they come up in conversations? Are they being considered?
So
Because
all I
there
can
was a lot of publicity around it afterwards. After he met with people in the sector, there was at least a couple of news reports that came out that said that they were being considered. So do you have any awareness about them being considered?
I'm just aware of what's been publicly announced, and so the Major Projects Office would be better placed to answer those questions. So the ones that have been announced for consideration are the ones that I listed, publicly
Okay, thank you.
announced.
Sorry, am I on? Okay. I wanted to also ask about, you talked a little bit about the misinformation or the misunderstanding around the timelines for environmental assessment, but the Major Projects Office had to be created. So I'm wondering, where would the streamlining process, like what was broken within the system in order for this new process or this new process to have to move forward?
So the Building Canada Act doesn't just deal with impact assessment. There are, I think there are 19 pieces of legislation listed in the schedule that it deals with. So the objectives are to provide more upfront certainty on the outcomes, so that initial authorization of the project, sort of pre-approved, subject to conditions that will be issued in a single document as opposed to multiple, which is currently the case. So currently there's an impact assessment decision, but we're just one part of the regulatory process. And as I mentioned at the outset, we don't apply to very many projects. There's Fisheries Act authorizations, Species at Risk Act authorizations, mining effluent regulations. There are a number of federal permits. And so the objective of the Act is to streamline all of those permits into one process that's supposed to happen within 2 years and a single decision document, and to provide investors with upfront certainty on the outcomes of those processes. But the other requirements of these acts will still apply to those projects.
Okay. I had another question as well. We talked in our last meeting about the oil and emissions cap, and I'm just wondering, how does that interact with the environmental assessment for the projects that do make their way onto the list? Are they still subject to the cap, or how does that work?
A project being subject to an impact assessment under our Act wouldn't have any implications for our obligations under the cap.
Okay.
An impact assessment could look at emissions related to projects and understand what the emissions would be. There is not federal jurisdiction under our Act to impose conditions in relation to emissions, but they could be assessed.
Okay. And when you're talking about timelines and fast tracking projects, do you ever measure or study the financial impacts of the delays on the projects that move forward? Because what we hear from a lot of proponents is that, time is money within their business, and in light of where we are as a country, I'm just curious if that's ever anything that's considered in terms of the timelines that you're reaching for.
Sorry, time is up. If you can provide us with a written response to that question, or maybe answer it when members will be asking the question again. Sorry about that. Thank you. We will now passe maintenant la parole.
We'll now go over to Mr. St. Pierre. Thank you. 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. As you know, C5 was passed in June. I'd like to know what the impact will be of this act on your agency. I'm looking at Eric, Ian, and Patricia. And second of all, What is the direct link between your agency and the Major Projects Office? The office is still being set up.
This has a CEO, Don Farrell, that was announced, and still in the process of staffing up, first of all. But certainly for those projects that are subject to our Act and that are listed under the new Act, we will have to be working very closely with the Major Projects Office to support the development of those conditions documents within 2 years. And so the internal governance processes under which we'll work will be established once the office is fully set up, but we'll certainly be working closely with them and supporting their work.
C'est un peu en évolution, donc.
So it's in progress. So it's yet to come. I'm curious, and I think that Patricia talked about the Contrecoeur project, and I have a Quebec riding, and I'm seeing my colleague here is not too far from Contrecoeur either. Can you please speak to the assessment in Contrecoeur? And in your opinion, is there a timeline for this project, or is it too early? Well, to give you some context, the Contrecoeur project did go through an environmental assessment, and the agency's role is now over. The other agencies that regulate those will now issue permits. In terms of timing for major projects, the Office of Major Projects would be better positioned to answer that question. Our role is finished now because the project was approved. Perfect. And another question, could you please talk to us about your collaboration with the Canadian Energy Regulator to give us some context? A brief explanation of the connection between you and them. Thank you. Now, with the Canadian Energy Regulator, we have a memorandum of understanding that defines how we work with that organization. Currently, there are no projects underway that are being assessed that fall under our Act and under the Regulators Act. So it's an informal dialogue. A few times per year, there's a meeting between the counterparts, or presidents and such. And sometimes we have projects that fall under both of the acts. Or sometimes we have an integrated assessment that will meet the requirements of our act and those of the Regulators Act. So we prepare for a future scenario, but for the time being, there is none. Thank you very much. I just have a minute and a half, so I'll go over to the Canada Water Agency. I am in Honoré Mercier, which is close to Rivière-des-Pierreries. That's my riding. And, of course, it's connected to the St. Lawrence River. And my colleague here is also in a riding that is along the St. Lawrence. So a general question. Can you describe the importance of the Rivière-des-Prairies or the St. Lawrence River? Are there issues that you're dealing with that are in connection with the St. Lawrence River?
Thank you for the question. The St. Lawrence is part of one of our freshwater ecosystem initiatives, one among 8, from the Fraser Valley to the St. Jean River and the St. Lawrence. We've been working on this ecosystem since 1988. It's a Canada-Quebec agreement that defines the terms of action plan for the St. Lawrence. It's been very fruitful, and I can't exactly quote the phase that we're in, but it's in the 2011-2026 phase agreement that aims to improve water quality, conserve biodiversity, and keep the water usable over the long term. So this is an important waterway for us. It has a great deal of economic importance for us, as you can imagine, and we are in negotiations right now to renew the agreement from 26 to 36. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Pierre. Mr. Bonnet, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me keep going. I received letters and I've met with people from these priority intervention zones, or ZIPs. These people were very, really quite concerned about their renewal of funding, that as of 2026, there is no funding to be expected, that they'd have to turn to the agency to get program funding. Is that correct, that there's no renewal officially? And are you concerned that ZIP committees are worried about their future, given their importance? Thank you for the question. Yes, in 2026, the ZIP program that we had under the Canada-Quebec agreement will be evolving. When we started ZIP committees, there were no regional consultation tables that now exist in most regions where we have these ZIP committees. And these regional consultation tables mandate, as is the case for the ZIP groups, they're similar, there is overlap. So the direct grant under the agreement for ZIP groups comes to an end because of these new agreements. But that, there are some that may keep doing their work, like in the Saint-Jean area, they may continue to do their work. So there's not 1 cent earmarked from the federal government for these ZIP programs for basic funding. How much was the entire envelope at the time? How much did ZIPs cost? The full envelope was $1 million, approximately. Each committee received about $75,000 a year. And these regional consultation tables are not funded by the federal government, to my knowledge, correct? No, this is something that the province of Quebec subsidizes to support regional consultation and develop their priorities. So there's no federal government money for that. So you're telling me that these regional consultation tables, there's nothing that ZIP committees do above and beyond what these committees could do. I may have to get back to you on that to really draw the distinctions between these two models, between the tables and the committees. What I can say is that ZIP committees can make requests for proposals through the Canada Water Agency. Thank you.
Mr. Bexty, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate your time today. Thank you, witnesses, for coming. I guess related to C5, and now that the Major Projects Office has been announced, I wondered what your agency is doing to ensure that there's not going to be duplication of effort between provincial agencies and assessments that have already taken place or potential future assessments.
As between provinces and the federal government, so that's one of our priorities right now, is working on cooperation agreements with the provinces to implement a one project, one review approach, which means that if a project would be subject to both the Federal Act and provincial, from a proponent's perspective and from the Indigenous groups that we consult perspective, we'll have one process that will apply.
So I appreciate that. So you're working on that. You're developing the rules?
We have currently a cooperation agreement in place with British Columbia.
Right.
So we are implementing. We have now a draft agreement out with New Brunswick, so we'll begin implementing, and we are hopeful in the coming weeks. The federal government committed to be ready to strike these agreements within 6 months of the speech from the throne. So by end of fall is when we've said federal side would be ready to start implementing. And
are you going to be ready to start implementing by that deadline?
With interested provinces, absolutely.
Are there provinces that aren't interested?
There are provinces that are more advanced in the discussions than others.
Do you anticipate some provinces won't be ready?
Interested or ready? on different timelines potentially.
They won't make the deadline.
I should say that even absent agreements, we have the flexibility in our act to rely on what provinces are doing in their assessments and to take those as equivalent by default within ours. It would be better under a cooperation agreement where the rules are clear and the full suite of tools in the Impact Assessment Act can be used to defer to provinces. But even absent an agreement with another province, we will be able to, and we have already started, relying on what provinces are doing and taking those as equivalent in our assessments.
Yeah, so as a partial and just taking it into your assessment as is.
That's right. And
Okay.
we've reduced our information requirements significantly by doing that.
So
So that's
how do
one
you-
of the key ways that we'll find efficiencies.
Okay, I'm going to move fast because time is limited. How do you anticipate resolving conflicts between provinces that come to a different conclusion?
I guess I would say it's happened, I think, maybe once in the history of impact assessment and environmental assessment. So it's a very unlikely outcome.
Do you anticipate it being more or less likely in the future, considering the state of the nation?
If we're in a one project, one review world and we're both relying on the same information to make decisions, I think it should be highly unlikely that there would be different outcomes.
I would hope, but
As well, I would mention the federal decision as a result of the Supreme Court decision and amendments that were made in 2024 to our Act. The federal decision is very narrowly focused on federal effects of projects.
So how do you square that circle then with federal assessment requirements, provincial assessment requirements, and duplication of efforts and delay in the timeline to approval?
Again, through the relying on what the province is doing to meet any federal requirements. The province may also be doing it, in which case we're committed to relying on them. Some provinces prefer to rely on what the federal government is doing, and so our cooperation agreements will allow for that as well.
So if there's conflict, I'm just trying to piece this together on the fly. Who would be the adjudicator if there's conflict between a provincial assessment or a provincial agency or province and?
Do you have
Sorry. Typically, we will work with our partners during the process. So typically, I'll use the case of BC, the substituted process. So one process, one assessment. My team will participate and support BC EAO as part of that process. We coordinate federal participation in that process. So we use the process to identify key issues early and to resolve them.
With all due respect,
yeah.
There's a hierarchy, right? There needs to be a hierarchy
Yes.
of who is above.
Yes, but ultimately through that process, the provincial ministries will make their own decision, and the federal minister will make their own decision.
Goes back to the minister.
Yes, for
Peace.
decision.
That's the short answer.
Thank you very much. Time's up. Sorry
Time's
about
up.
that.
All right, thank you.
Next, we will go to Mrs. Hidema.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I am representing Halifax. That's my riding. And so I have a couple of questions for the Canada Water Agency. You mentioned those really big strategic projects you're focused on, that there are 8 maybe. Do they go further east than New Brunswick? In the Halifax Regional Municipality, there are over 1,000 lakes. Most of them are highly stressed urban lakes. And so I'm just wondering how you decide on those strategic initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. The furthest east of our ecosystem initiative is the St. John-Wallastock River in New Brunswick, starting in Quebec and going into New Brunswick. In terms of support to address freshwater challenges further east or outside of our 8 freshwater ecosystem initiatives, we do have the Eco Action Program that supports community-led projects to address local challenges that communities might be facing with their waterfront or their waters. The Eco Action also supports innovation and sustainability projects that may have a more broad applications.
Thanks. And how well funded is this Eco Action program, and how do you allocate dollars across the country? Is it a granting role that you play in that?
Sure. So again, thank you for the question. The Eco Action program has been around for a very long time. It has a sustained funding. It does go through a competitive call for application process where we receive often hundreds of applications from across Canada. And we go through a rigorous review process and then look at the different allocations for the different projects across the country.
Thank you. And are municipal governments eligible for this Eco Action funding? I was formerly the Director of Environment and Climate Change for the municipality of Halifax, and we a lot fell to us locally in terms of monitoring blue-green algae and addressing it in a lot of our stressed urban lakes, high bacteria counts. We did all the testing for all of our lifeguarded supervised beaches, and the province of Nova Scotia is largely absent from all of that work, and it all came at a cost to the local taxpayer. So just wondering if there's support for local level governments who across Canada are actually doing a lot of this work.
Yes. Thank you for the question. Yes, municipalities are eligible for funding through the Eco Action program.
Yeah. I will move on to impact assessment. So I used to actually study this, and I was always really interested in cumulative effects and how they are treated. And I'm just wondering how that, I've been out of touch with the work federally now for a while. If you could just speak for a bit on how you manage cumulative effects, if that thinking's evolved. I know there was a lot of work being done back when I was a student, and how cumulative effects will be considered in these one project, one review scenarios with these fast-track nation-building projects. Thank you.
So under the Act, we have the ability to conduct regional assessment. So that is a major tool that we've started using to gather data and to be able to address cumulative effects. Because when we're doing individual project assessment, it is more of a challenge to look at cumulative effects. So the idea behind regional assessments is you get there before you start individual project assessment. You do a lay of the land and then really assess the potential impact of current, past, current, and potential future development to assess it. So we've used that tools on multiple occasions. So we did an offshore exploratory well regional assessment in Newfoundland. We've just recently conducted, finalized 2 offshore wind regional assessment, one in Nova Scotia, one in Newfoundland. As well, we have one that is in the ongoing in the Ring and Fire Regional Assessment Area in Ontario. And we are about to provide the minister, for her approval terms of reference for St. Lawrence Regional Assessment. So the idea here is really that you take a holistic view, and that through the regional assessment, you're able to then develop conditions that would apply to future projects. And the idea is with the regional assessment, it will make future individual project assessment more.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Thank you. So I have a proposition for the committee. As time stands, we're supposed to end in 5 minutes or so, with only one member speaking. Would it be the consent of the whole committee to have all members given more time to speak? So that would be 3 minutes to the Conservatives and Liberals and 2 minutes to the Bloc in the last round. Or there'd be only one member, being the Conservative, for 5 minutes.
Donc, la proposition, normalement, c'est 5 minutes pour...
Usually there would be, so there are 5 minutes left. In other words, one member, so the Conservative Party would have the opportunity to ask questions, express their views for 5 minutes, or do we want to split this in 3 so that all parties have an opportunity to ask 1 or 2 questions of the department? So I would propose that if we were to split this 5 minutes, the Conservatives, Liberals would each have 3 minutes and the Bloc would have 2 minutes. Is it the will of the committee to proceed this way, yes or no?
Vous êtes d'accord de votre côté?
Personnellement,
Do you agree? I'd rather we do 5 minutes.
possible.
The shorter the better.
Parfait. So, 5 minutes
Point
left.
of order. Point of order. I haven't had an opportunity to speak.
I'm sorry. We got 5 minutes left, and the next person to speak is the next party to speak is the Conservative Party. And from what I can hear, there's no consent to break up the 5 minute. So I will proceed next with Mr. Leslie. You got exactly 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to start with the IAA. You outlined that the process seems to be working incredibly well. The efficiencies that have been gained are seemingly quite staggering. So given that this all sounds so great, could you explain to me why the government would feel the need to pass Bill C-5, the Building Canada Act, and create the Major Projects Office at all?
I guess I will say that what Bill C-5 or what the Building Canada Act does is not just related to impact assessment. As I mentioned, the Impact Assessment Act is just one part of the regulatory framework that applies to major projects. And so, as I understand it, the objective of the Act is, as I said, to provide that upfront certainty to investors on the outcomes of the process and to streamline multiple processes, of which the Impact Assessment Act is only one and not necessarily implicated always in a project that might be listed under the Building Canada Act. So it would be to streamline those multiple requirements into one decision and one conditions document in a 2-year process.
You mentioned that in terms of the proponent, if there is an agreement with the province, it will seem to them as there is only one province, only one process. Can you confirm that the province is still doing its own process of environmental assessment, as is the Impact Assessment Agency? So there is still 2 processes going on. You may lend one information from the other, but at the end of the day, is this actually going to shorten any approval processes?
Under the new tools that were put into the Act in 2024 amendments and that we are working to enable through the cooperation agreements that we're working on now, it would allow for one process. So there is already a tool in the Act for that, substitution. We use that with BC, where the federal minister can decide that another province, their regime can completely substitute the federal one. So with BC, we do that. Previously,
but right now there is still going to be 2 processes happening. I just don't understand how adding a second bureaucracy is going to enhance the streamlined nature of this process.
Under the cooperation agreements, it will be one process, one review. That might look different depending on the project. There are a number of ways to enable one process, but the Act now allows for either completely the provincial process to lead and apply. It allows for a harmonized process, where it is truly one process. Between the 2 of us, we're figuring out who does what. From a proponent perspective, it's one process.
Thank you. I'm curious, I looked through the inventory of projects. It seems as though since the inception of 2019, there have only been 3 projects approved. You said there was an average of 8 going through, applied for by proponents. And so in 6 years, we've had 3 projects approved. Could you provide this committee with a series of stats on a year-by-year basis of how many project proponents have moved forward with projects, how many have been accepted, how many have been rejected, and the average time of each delineated by the type of project that it is when you get a chance?
That kind of detailed information and volume of stats we would need to come back with in writing. Yep. But
That's great.
I can say...
I'd like to move over to the Canadian Water Agency. I noted that there was an article that came out regarding some confusion politically about cuts, in which there was a reporter added to a group chat of Environment Minister staffers. At that time, the president of the Canadian Water Agency was unable to provide a comment about his concerns, if any, regarding a cut to the Canadian Water Agency, although the political implications were made clear via those text messages between political staffers. I'm wondering, since it's been a month, has the Canadian Water Agency formed a position on what the impact of cuts to the agency might mean for freshwater in Canada?
Hi there. Thank you for the question. The Canada Water Agency was in scope for the Comprehensive Expenditure Review initiative that was undertaken by the Government of Canada. And so as part of that process, there was discussions with the Minister's Office and internally within the Canada Water Agency executives. And so we successfully did submit savings proposals in response to this initiative. And so the content of those proposals are under cabinet confidence. Therefore, I cannot speak to the contents of it, but I can say that we were in scope for the process.
Thank you. I'd just like to jump back to the Impact Agency. It looks as though that your staffing has ballooned 33% in the past 3 years. Has this hiring spree have any evidence of increasing the pace of approvals and or rejections?
Sorry, I don't have information on the correlation between timelines and staffing volumes at the Impact Assessment Agency. Our budget was renewed in 2022.
Thank you.
It looks like it was up 47% in 2022.
Thank you. Time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Donc, ceci met fin à la période de questions.
This brings us to the end of our question period. I'd like to thank both agencies for having been here this morning. Thank you for answering our questions, and I wish you a wonderful end of your day and weekend. Thank you very much. We will now go in camera. Meeting suspended. Mr. Chair, can I take just 1 minute?